It's noon Pacific time, and it's definitely a Monday. I'm Erika Heald, your content chat host, and today my guest is Molly St. Louis, who I've had the pleasure of working with very recently on a shared clients thought leadership project. And I had to, as soon as I heard of some of her examples of some of the video projects that she'd been working on with brands, I had to have her come on to talk to all of us about branded video content. So, Molly, thank you for joining us. And if you,
Absolutely. Thank you. Thank you for bringing me on, Erica. You're one of my favorite people.
oh, you're so nice. You're one of my favorite people too, which is why I had to have you come on here. But before we jump into all of our questions, because I have so many questions, because I love the branded content you've been doing, for folks who don't know you, who are you and what do you do?
I'm Molly St. Louis, and I do branded communications for brands. We do at our group, Mosaic Media Group Media. I have it with my husband, who's a professional actor, and we try to bring entertainment formats into B2B thought leadership, and that is for the purpose of getting more eyeballs and for longer on expert content.
Love it. And that's exactly why you're here today. Because what I loved is you're taking a very different approach to branded video. I mean, to you and I, it doesn't necessarily feel that different, but when you think about historically what we've been seeing brands do in video, I definitely feel like taking a more entertainment and editorial approach is new. So I wondered if you could sort of ground folks first in talking a little bit about like what the video content that we'd been seeing, over the last few years looks like versus what's actually working today. Because I think that's always a great way to get started.
For sure. I mean, I think a lot of this, a lot of the way that I've been thinking about it comes out of having worked for PR firms. And one of the major things when you're representing thought leaders, CEOs, CFOs, people that are experts in what they do, normally when you're pitching to the news, people always ask, show me some video on them because they want to make sure that they're going to be entertaining in front of a mass audience.
Yeah.
And so a lot of the thinking on this was born out of uh, helping CEOs and really really smart people get their very complex ideas across in a way that is digestible for a mass audience. And so as we started working through this, I started looking at TV formats because my background and my original education is in entertainment and entertainment formats. So one of the things that we usually see is people say, I'm going to get on. I'm going to get on air and I'm just going to wing it. And we'll just talk about whatever. We'll talk about marketing, for example. But no, Erika Heald, you said we're going to talk about video marketing. So if people don't know me, which they probably don't, probably don't care that you have Molly St. Louis on the show, unless you're Molly St. Louis's mom. But if
So, hi, Mom.
if hi mom, who's not watching this because you're a teacher, but if they care about the subject of video marketing, specifically for B2B, specifically for the expert audience, the C-suite, then you probably tune in and watch it. But one of the things that I think you'll see a lot of HubSpot, for example, will probably tell you don't make your videos longer than a minute because nobody will watch it.
Yeah.
My theory was that if we use television formats, then maybe we could get them watching for 3 minutes, 4 minutes, 5 minutes, etc. So if you notice what happens when you watch the news, they're constantly moving. They've got one guest, then maybe they have, a segment where there's sort of documentary style footage, stats. They bring in 3 more guests. It's to constantly give people something else to look at. And so I find that if you do that, you can keep people watching for longer.
And it's so much more engaging than just having, a talking head talking for 4 minutes. And we've all, been assigned those projects. And they're the worst kinds of content projects to get assigned because, it's not going to do what they want it to do. It's not going to engage people. It's not going to drive them to take action. And definitely no one is going to comment on it or share it.
Right. And if depending on who your audiences are, I mean, you and I, we kind of work for enterprise C-suite, and so they don't want to like and comment and share anyway. So I mean, they're not the typical folks that do that.
Yeah,
So you have a double challenge there.
100%. But I love too that you mentioned, when you're trying to pitch from the comms side, so your PR team's out there trying to pitch the executives because you have built up, their expertise in an area. When you don't have a really good video that shows that they can be succinct and on point and have those great sound bites, it can be really hard to get some of those kinds of engagements for them. And you can't just be like, oh, here's a recording of their 40-minute keynote speech or something, because that's too long. It's the wrong format. It doesn't show that they're going to shine in this kind of thought leadership realm either, because that's like a whole different ballpark. People are there to see them because they're super invested in the topic, and that's not your social media audience.
Absolutely. And also, I think it helps the executives from their own journey with being public speakers to see what they look like when there's the raw footage and then when we edit it. And what is the difference between what it looked like when you were kind of going off the top of your head and giving more information than you needed to. Nobody's fault. It's hard to do. All of us do it. I'm probably doing it right now. But but then when we edit it, then you can see, this is the nugget of information I need to get to pique people's interest. So it actually helps them later on when they do media, when they get the media opportunity.
Totally.
Mm-hmm.
So when you're looking at that raw footage, what are some of the little nuggets or, engaging elements that you're looking for to make sure that you're pulling out in creating these, few little segments for these kinds of thought leadership branded content pieces?
I find that it's authentic stories, like people love stories. If you're telling a story about how you totally bombed and what you learned from it, people love that. They like anything that has to do with data. You can do a total mic drop moment. I mean, I have a client right now that is just doing some incredible things in the construction industry and lifting productivity by 10%, which 10% might not sound like a lot if we're talking about it, in context to 100%. But when you realize how much money, that revenue that represents, it's kind of a mic drop moment when you can bust out numbers like that.
Yeah.
Also, linking what your product is doing to current trends. It's not just about your story and what's important to you and your company, but people are tuning in to watch you to learn about what they can do better with their companies. So the more that you can link those things to a broader narrative and what's going on in the industry, people are going to watch that.
Totally agreed. So I thought it'd be really helpful if you could share some of those, some specific examples of some of the branded video content pieces or series that you've worked on for clients. And of course, you don't need to name names if you're not allowed to, but if you can too, then we'll link to them in the recap so that way folks can go and take a look.
Definitely. So we did one. We did one during the pandemic with a company called Clary, which is the revenue operations leader, and we did a branded series with them in which we interviewed experts in the revenue area just as they were building this category. And the cool thing was that Clary has an incredible point of view, and it brought other experts into the fold to, to kind of validate that in a lot of ways and add to it. And then I did one with a company called DealTale that won a Telly Award. And then right now, the brand we have launching tomorrow is ProTiv. So you'll see those ones in the future. Um, but but yeah, the other ones, I would say they were all a very long time ago. And I think prior to the pandemic, people were, I think, less likely to do video because it's expensive sometimes, the way we were doing it before. Um, we always thought we needed production crews and things. And now people are realizing they can do quite a lot on um, YouTube or, just using your iPhone. So I would say um, we've gotten to be a video centric, at least in B2B. It's become kind of a must do. And so there's some people doing it extremely well.
Totally. So I love the examples that you gave of being able to validate your kind of unique thought leadership perspective by having other industry leaders coming on in the way that Clary did. Because I think that's one of the things that people kind of forget. Is that when you have a podcast or a video series where you're having those interactions and you're lifting up other people's work, that it does help validate that you have those industry connections and that you understand your audience and what really concerns them. And I'm surprised how frequently people are like, oh, well, we can only use our own experts and our clients. We would never want to have an outside brand. And that to me just seems like such a missed opportunity.
You're absolutely right. And honestly, you're the expert on that too, because I know what you can do with figuring out what people are watching and how all of that fits together. But it really is. I mean, as long as it's not one of your direct competitors, why not? I think you make more friends that way. I mean, if you think of your video program as making friendships and supporting other people in the same way that you should be doing on your social media, not just talking about yourself but talking about everybody, you open it up, and the people that you're supporting will support you, and so it does broaden your network. So I would say, as long as they're not like going head to head with you on sales meetings, pitch meetings or anything like that, do some co-marketing. I mean, everything's expensive. Shoot, get some partners to help you out.
Totally, especially from a distribution standpoint, because I think we can spend so much time and money creating this content, but then we don't actually distribute the content. We just put it up on our brand channels. And I was going to wait to get into this, but this feels like a good time, as good a time as any to talk about this. Because I know that you've had some experience in creating the branded content and then getting it placed. So I'd love it if you could share a little bit about the project that you worked on that became part of NASDAQ's content.
Yeah, that was also with Clary. So we did one during the pandemic that was done in my basement, with me, because that's what we had, with cats running around in the background. But I'm also a video editor, so we put in some special effects and stuff like that. But then we started tapping into this chief revenue officer audience, and then we showed it to NASDAQ and said, we want to produce a a series that goes on your site, and we just we try to take you have to take into account what the other site is doing. If we were doing something that was so far off of like what NASDAQ talks about, it's not going to work. And so that was one, and they were such a great partner. But then also one of the things that you can also think about is branded opportunities with a media partner that are paid.
Mhm.
So what I've been talking about up until this point is earned and owned content. But then Bloomberg, the Wall Street Journal, the Atlantic, they have these incredible opportunities for brands to partner with them, in which you collaborate together to make content that both speaks to your brand and what you're doing, and then also speaks to their audience. So you cross those things over. Um, One of the things that people kind of have trouble getting their mind around is that you can't just write something and be like, here, Wall Street Journal, and I paid you. So put it up there. No, they have to make sure that it is journalistically sound, that it sounds like their brand, and so you collaborate with them on how to do this. But the great thing about that is that it reaches a much wider audience. So, for example, I know you work with a lot of large enterprises. If one of those perhaps wanted to shift and shift their narrative, move into a different market, move up market, move down market, a branded campaign is probably a really good way to go. Speaking of this, I think this is something that people need to be aware of too. There's some really cool things happening with video. If you're not aware of it, brand storytelling is Sundance's program for branded films. They're called brand funded films, if y'all haven't heard of them. And it's essentially happening for a couple reasons. One of them is because commercials, we can skip past them if we want to now. We don't have to watch them if we don't want to. The other thing is the changes with the third-party cookies. There's a few trends that are fueling this particular trend of brands making films that are sort of about who they are as a company, not them necessarily, but how they.
Not their values. Yeah.
So I believe it was Sephora did a beautiful one of Black beauty, the history of African American women in beauty, and and the troubles that they went through and everything. Sephora wasn't mentioned in the film, and the focus of the film, I may be a little bit off on that, but it's generally right. Sephora, they're not saying, and Sephora did this. They're making a film that people want to watch, and it's that the idea is that their audience is going to connect with them on a more personal level because of that. They're not being sold anything. So check out that trend. Check out brand storytelling at Sundance. There's some really cool things going on. Companies like Yeti, like 3M, they're doing some amazing things. And I think B2B companies or even startups can start to get into that space.
And honestly, I'm kind of surprised it took so long for it to really catch fire as a trend because, for decades in other countries, they would frequently hire folks like some of our, artier independent film directors to create longer form commercials and things for them or little mini films. So you'd think that we would have caught on a little bit more quickly that this was something fun to do that really has the opportunity to delight our communities that we serve and giving them, showing them that we can be creators of, be it a really cool documentary or something that's just beautiful and entertaining. Like, can you imagine, if a brand had Wes Anderson create a little 10-minute short film about some value that they have or a thing that they're really passionate about? Like, wouldn't that be amazing? Wouldn't that get them as much press as, a whole huge advertising campaign would get eyeballs on it? I mean, it's just really amazing to me. And it does have that opportunity to show rather than just telling your audience who you are as a company.
Oh, yeah. It's a really cool time to be a marketer right now. Just very, very, very creative. I believe that they said Ted Lasso started off as a marketing thing. And
Oh, really?
into, yeah. Let me see if I can get you that article, the link in the comments, because it's pretty cool.
Okay, cool. So what I love about this is it shows that we can be creative and go beyond trying to just tell a product story. Because I think when people hear branded content, they think, oh, that means it's content that has to be just really in your face about being from the brand. But when you look at things like, I think North Face has certainly done a lot of conservation, and I think they've also done some branded video content as well. And it's like, they're a little bit more obvious because, of course, the explorers going to any cold place, they're always wearing North Face anyway.
Oh,
So it's, it's such the obvious thing for them to do. But other brands too can just think about, how could we, what would be something that would stop the scroll that our people, really care about? And that for me is super fun. But on the flip side, we're not all necessarily used to doing that. So let's talk about some of the challenges that people need to be aware of if they're like, all right, cool, branded content, let's go for it. What are some of the things that you've learned that you always have to think about well in advance before you are at the saying yes point?
Yeah, so the caveat is that I would love to say that I make cat videos and things like that, or things that are applicable to a wide variety of audiences. Because if I got paid to just work with cats all day, I probably would quit my job, even though I love my job. But I tend to do content for experts, data scientists, C-suite mostly. So the challenge that I often run into when I'm working with production companies sometimes is that a lot of work has to be done to make sure that it is actually for that expert audience, that it is deep content, and no, it is not going to be entertaining for a broader audience, but the audience that you really want, which is this audience of people with MBAs or PhDs. It has to be as smart as they are, because otherwise they're not going to watch it. It's as if somebody did a documentary for marketers and said, you have to grab their attention, and like made that like the mic drop moment. You were like, yeah, I know, I've been doing this for 20 years. No, so you have to really make that content deep. The other thing is you can do it relatively inexpensively. In fact, a couple of years ago, actually during the pandemic, Shopify was saying, I went to a webinar with Shopify, and they said that Frankenstein content was doing the best, meaning content that was done on Zoom but then had animation over it, because it was taken as more authentic.
Yeah.
So the conversations were more real. Whereas if somebody's in a studio, you may be like, I don't know, who's paying you? So you can do some really cool things with just an iPhone or with Zoom. But if you're going to go for a media partnership, you really, really, really need to make sure it's the right one. It's the one that your audience is reading. You need to make sure that if you have a niche audience specifically, that they can get to those people. And I would say that those were the major challenges.
I think for a lot of folks, though, another major challenge is just getting the narrative right. Because although we've perfected storytelling as far as understanding how to construct, an ebook or a blog post, I think a lot of folks really do struggle with how do you construct a narrative and, put together a script in a format that's going to keep people's attention. So I'm wondering, do you have like a process or any tools that you use that have really or templates or frameworks that have kind of helped you do that?
I would say watch TV. Everything that if you grew up in the 80s and 90s, your parents said would rot your brain, watch it, because that's what people are used to. So like if you look at Netflix documentaries, for example, watch how long they stay on a certain subject. Like watch the show The Mind Explained, or watch one of my favorites was Brain Games. If we're talking about B2B audiences, and see how fast, like try to count how many segments they have within a 4-minute period. It's probably like either 2 or 3 where they've switched up what the thing looks like, what we're talking about. Did we go into a fun animation about the story? However you can make it more visual, people are going to watch it more. The one that I did for Deal Tell recently, the watch rate to the end, it was on a remarketing campaign, and I think 75% of people watched all the way to the end on a video that they didn't know
Great.
they were about to see, which was cool.
Yeah.
It had mostly animation in it. The people that dropped off after the animation. It was a hybrid. It was a person plus animation. They dropped off after the animation started, or sorry, after the animation ended. So when it wasn't didn't have the visual component to it anymore, They
I
lost
lost interest. Yeah.
because a lot of people are visual learners.
So what if your brand though is, let's say, more conservative or staid? Like, how do you kind of balance the need for doing things that are engaging, like having animations with being true to the brand's voice? Because I know that's always the challenge, because you need to reflect the brand without being, talking about the brand. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on how to balance.
Definitely. If you have a more conservative brand, I think you should take a page out of the media, news media. Use more of a motion graphics look that has not such a, like when I say animations, I think people think of like 2D characters and things like that, which I was in that last example. But the other thing that you can do is get a really great motion graphics animator. And motion graphics are the sort of more 3D looking ones that you'll see on CNN, those kinds of newscasts where they look very they have a you trust it because it looks like it's made of money. To be honest, you can get a lot of those by going to Adobe stock images and looking for Mogart files for all of you editors out there. They're templatized. You can change them. You can change them in your brand colors, and you'll pay like $5. So there's some things that don't require specialty animation, but I would say for the conservative brands, you want to lean into the data a lot, and you want to lean into experts, the expert commentators. Think about things like throwing their quotes up on screen with like a beautiful picture, just to kind of keep everything dynamic, so you're not just watching them next to each other talking about big data. give people um, some ways of digesting the information that you really care that they get.
We used to call those tweetable moments, which, kind of encapsulated that kind of short and sweet, giving people something that they would share about by having it be, a beautiful, visualization of the data, or having those kinds of pull quotes written out on screen. I mean, that's so smart because it helps people really easily articulate, well, what was it that they just said that I loved? It really resonated. Well, there it is. So that way then they can have it and take it with them.
That's a really, really good point. If you ever been to one of those conferences where people have a keynote and the PowerPoint's up there and you see people just taking a picture of the slides they like, I think that's what, like, similar to what you're talking about.
Yeah.
We
Because
love it.
we've all seen people, I've seen screen caps of all sorts of presentations I've given, people that will share it later, like on LinkedIn or someplace, and you're like, oh my gosh. So people will actually do that. So even though our media that we're sharing this content on and talking about it has changed, some of those same behaviors those have become ingrained behaviors, especially for a B2B audience, which I think people are just kind of figuring out here on LinkedIn.
And the thing is, I mean, I don't know what's coming up in your feed. You can tell me, but like in my feed, I get inspirational quotes from people all the time, and that is what I love seeing it, because all of our jobs, they're challenging. They're changing every day. We've got ChatGPT now and big data and all of these things that are thrown at us all the time. And sometimes we have to remember like leadership skills and probably to let our anxiety go down. I saw one the other day on LinkedIn that said, don't let perfection be the enemy of progress. And I was like, oh my God, yeah, good reminder. And I think people like also hearing those human things. So I think no matter what kind of brand you have, if you can be a human being, it's helpful.
100%. I think one of the other big challenges that keeps kind of cropping up is the expectation that something's going to go viral. You can't blame TikTok, because TikTok, is not where people's obsession with going viral came from. We have to probably blame YouTube. I'm going to say, because people wanted, to have a viral video that got shared everywhere. but especially when you're talking about branded content and B2B, you want to be viral within your industry. You want everyone that's part of your community in your audience to be engaged with and excited about your content. So how do you use the data that you have, or what are some ways that you can get the data that you need in order to know that you're going to be creating the right content to really engage that audience, and then that you find the right places to distribute it? Because again, people are not coming to our websites. They're searching for things in Chat GPT, or they're scrolling the feed in LinkedIn. So how do you figure out where they're going to be and what they're going to want to actually engage with?
You bring up such a good point because a couple years ago, I work a lot with, like I said, CEOs on their thought leadership brands, on their POV. And one of them, a really, really smart man from a few years ago, said to me, I want to go viral with this story. And it was this really obscure, I can't say what it was, but it was extremely obscure. It had something to do with data. And the only people that were going to be like, yeah, man, are like elite executives. And I said, that will not go viral the way that you're thinking it's going to go viral because the audience isn't big enough. And it was me and another person working on it, and both of us have written for top tier publications in the past. And she and I both have had what some people have considered viral. And she said, well, I had a viral one. It was about the science of chocolate chip cookies. Who the hell doesn't love chocolate chip? And she did an amazing job of it. Of course, it went viral, and people are still pulling it up years later. Mine was about cyberbullying and why women shouldn't bully each other. Again, if half the population is women, you got a good chance that you've got a big audience. They were very, very broad subjects. So what I was trying to tell him is that everyone loves chocolate chip cookies. Not everybody loves the science of how to increase your etiba or whatever the thing was. It was not that. I just can't say what it is. And
a much smaller addressable audience.
Yeah. So it was just like setting those expectations. If you do one, for example, I had one that I article I did for Inc. magazine that was, I highly researched it. This was when I was brand new. This was 10 or 12 years ago. I don't know. And I thought, oh, people are going to love this because like I researched it and I think I bring up a very good point. And then this other one that I just had to get in to make the deadline was about leadership. And it was very surface and everybody shared it. And I just think it was because everybody could relate to it. It was called like Better Leaders or Better Listeners or something to that effect.
Yeah.
And I think it's because people wanted to show who they were as the person. Like, it doesn't matter what industry you're in, if you're a leader, leadership is a broad category,
Right.
So
Or if you have a boss who's a terrible listener, then you're sharing it so that way they'll see it and maybe read it.
right, maybe. I mean, you never know. I just saw it all
If
over
they're paying attention.
today, and I was like, oh my gosh, wow, okay, people like leadership. And this is when I was still learning, and I'm still learning. But for the distribution, I would say if you're doing a B2B audience, I would say set a benchmark for what viral means to you. Because if it's 500 shares or 500 engagements, that wouldn't be viral as it pertains to like TikTok or like that guy that does the Bridgerton hairstyles on Instagram, who is like a genius. It wouldn't be that guy. But if you can get 500 on a small audience, that's really good. And it also depends on who else is in it. If you want your reach, you got to tag people, you got to tag companies, you got to if you don't have that kind of influence already. So anyway, I would say set expectations. find the right platform and set expectations.
So if you could like pull out your crystal ball, like knowing what you know now and with the experience that you've had for doing this for more than a decade, what do you think the next trends are going to be as far as some of the technologies that are going to, start coming into play with branded content that are going to drive even more value for the brands?
Oh,
Because, for a while, everyone was like the metaverse, except, you didn't have legs there. So that didn't have any legs either. Didn't really go anywhere. Although there's still some brands there. But, I feel like people are still saying AR and VR are going to happen and they're a huge opportunity. But are you seeing that yet? Or are we still at the like interactive content with polling is about is going to be like our next big thing? It keeps being on everyone's list.
I think we want it to be on the list because it's cool,
Yeah.
I really think that, and I hope I'm not being Pollyannish, maybe I am, but that human creatives are going to become even more important in the next 5 years. I think ChatGPT is a tremendous platform or technology. The problem with thought leadership is that ChatGPT is pulling from what's already out there. And so then therefore it can't be a leading, you can't be a thought leader using ChatGPT to
It has no work experience also.
yeah, you have to be able to predict what's going to happen next. As a thought leader, you have to be an idea starter. And so in terms of journalists and people that have writing degrees and things like that, I think you're going to become more important. And you know, on the video production side, there's some cool things coming out. Like there's AI that does your storyboards for you. If you're a creative person that maybe doesn't have the tactical skills of drawing and doing storyboards, there's things coming out for that. I think it's just going to make things a lot easier. Um, but in terms of platforms, yeah, I think brand funded films are going to become a major must have for brands, whether you're a startup or whether you're an enterprise.
And it'll be fun for all of us for sure.
Yes, I imagine somebody like you is going to get your claws into that really fast.
Definitely. Um, One of the things though that I think is hard is, when people put up a landing page to download an ebook, it's pretty easy to say, all right, what's the objective for this page, for this piece of content? It's like, well, we want to get so many downloads. And of the people that download, we want them to go on this kind of a journey or path or whatever. But when it comes to something new like this and something that is, a piece of content that's meant to resonate with the audience and not be directly about the brand, you know, how do you sell that into a C-suite when they're so used to now, you know, having analytics about everything and being able to predict, a direct tie to revenue? Because, you're probably not going to be able to do that if you're doing a brand film, for example.
Mm. Yeah, I mean, you definitely have to get some people, some C-suites that are forward thinkers. But I think a lot of the C-suite now really understands the value of corporate branding, and that you audiences now they want to know how you think as an organization, what you support, what you stand for. What causes do you support? What do if we're taking a step back and we're looking at this as a holistic um, comms strategy, you have to know what you respond to and um, what your culture is. And I think a lot of the C-suite is starting to understand that and make investments in that type of marketing. And so I would say there's a couple of ways to get around the ones that don't. Put them in the film, you know. And I'm saying this because it will allow them to give their points of view. So just from an investment standpoint, you can clip those and use them all
Yeah.
over your marketing as well. So even if the film doesn't make it to Sundance or doesn't make it to Cannes or any of those things, you can use those things as other distribution channels. You can use them in your product marketing. Perhaps you do a cut of it where it is um, a tutorial like HubSpot has in HubSpot Academy, where they're teaching this sort of mindset of what's new. Um, I've worked with category creators, and so the idea behind category creation is that it's going to take a lot of market education,
Yeah.
and so that might be my bias. If category creation strategy isn't your chosen strategy, then maybe it's harder. But for the category creators, they know that they have to educate. So I would say if you're pitching that, maybe use that as your angle.
Well, Todd Jones, who was actually recently on Content Chat and is part of our community, said that brand awareness seems to have gone away in the C-suite. And it's interesting because, there are, all sorts of folks that aren't doing PR and aren't necessarily even doing real content marketing. There's a lot of stuff out there that's being called content marketing that's really just product content, because it's all about the brand and its products.
Yes.
So, I'm wondering, do you find that this approach is you're going to be more likely to get acceptance of this pitch from an organization that already has invested in PR? Or do you feel like this might even be the right first step for an emerging kind of company where they don't necessarily feel like they have enough of a story or enough happening to have a PR firm on retainer? I'd love to kind of pick your brain about that.
Oh, absolutely. And Todd, that's a really great point, and I definitely agree with you. I think that after the pandemic, everyone was going, oh, like we've got to get money in the door. A lot of budgets were frozen, and people were going, no, we don't want to spend $1 million on top of
Awareness.
funnel awareness. We just need warm bodies in the door. So I think that that's absolutely true. But the thing is that if you don't keep that funnel wide, it's going to dry up. And I had the benefit of working at a PR firm that was really, really good at making news happen where there wasn't news. And so a lot of that was kind of what built up my perspective on thought leadership, which is that if you don't have it, you need to figure it out and make it. So, and marketers, it's a great opportunity for you to ideate with your C-suite and figure out what is your perspective, and then how does it fit into all of the trends or emerging trends that are going on. Um, you know, for example, if you're seeing an industry, a lot of people are talking about the tech bubble bursting, or something about not the tech bubble bursting. The fact that unicorns don't exist anymore is a thing that's talking about. So,
Yeah.
like, what's your perspective on why that is, and how does your product actually fit into that? The it's Some of us call it newsjacking, like PR publicists call it that. But the more that you can do that and fit yourself into the bigger story, I think the more longevity you'll have. And I'd love to hear everybody else's perspective on that too. What is yours, actually, Erica?
Well, it's funny because as you were talking about the newsjacking and the making news when there isn't any news, I actually worked on a really adorable slideshare on that topic when I was at Highwire PR because that's part of your job if you're on the comms team. And, I know people are like, you're a content person. How dare you talk about what the comms team's job is? It's like, well, because when I was in house, I had both. I had comms and content. I've done, executive comms, I've done employee comms, I've done PR, media relations, and I've owned content all at the same time at multiple places. Because to me, it all has to be together. And a big part of it is understanding, how does your story fit in? And 100% agree with you that if you're doing category building, which I've done in multiple companies, including one that was a unicorn because it was a broad enough category. So actually to kind of go down that path a little bit, it's like, why are there no unicorns anymore? Because that's not what's getting funded. We don't have anybody coming up with this, rarely have these great big ideas that are applicable to everybody and everything, because we've niched down. So many products now are like targeted to not like just marketers, they're targeted to content marketing teams with, 4 or fewer members. Like the level of like our expectation of everything being personalized and tailored to us is so different now than it was 4 years ago.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. And it's interesting to hear you talk about being on the content media relations team and all of that. They fit together. And so it's like, if you've been at a smaller company, maybe you've had to do all of them. When you're at a bigger company, you do one of them, but you know
Yep.
how the other one works. And I think everybody would kind of do well to kind of like spy on the other side and say, like, how can we make these fit better? Because it
Have
just
an
makes
editorial committee, work together.
yeah, work together. Yeah, okay. Don't spy on anybody. Just ask them to collaborate with you and figure out how you're going to put it together. That's a
Although if
better.
you're in that kind of an organization, you might just have to spy on them, but hopefully you can spy on them to see there's the opportunity to collaborate. And then that way, then everybody gets the credit instead of, fighting for the subject matter experts' time,
100.
and, working on parallel paths, because we've all seen that happen too.
Oh, definitely. Especially like if I know at Clary, we did a lot of filming and we had to film a lot of the time board members and investors, people that don't have a lot of time. And you might get their time for 15 minutes. They might be on the
Yeah.
camera for 15 minutes because they've got meetings to go to because that's their job. So you figure out how to carve the turkey, as they say. And if you haven't seen that analogy, it's like they have a turkey that looks like a content and like the leg is a different part of the talk that you are carving out. So it's all it's serving it in different ways, serving the same content in different ways.
Yep. And one of the things to think about is, when are those people going to be together someplace where you can easily grab a hold of them and ask them a couple of things that then can inform multiple pieces of content too. If you're lucky enough to have a user conference, that's a great place, but also industry events. I was fortunate enough when with one of my VC clients, I would get to go to the investor day. And when you would go to the investor day with all the portfolio company CEOs, CMOs, all of their executive teams, then we would go, okay, hey, we want to make, and for one time we were like made 14 different videos that had snippets from conversations from, 3 different people with the same role in very different companies. And how did we do that? We only had 10 minutes per person. And literally, we had room and we just cycled people in and out. We had people go run, get the person, bring them in. We asked them the questions, but we did all that planning in advance about what are those videos that we want, who are going to be the right people who we want to ask the questions for their perspectives, padding it to make sure that if somebody bombed, that we had enough other people that we were asking that we would be able to tell a really good story. And then you just have the logistics on site. And it's like, even though you might think, oh, how are we ever gonna, do this? There's almost always at least one time per year that all these people are going to be together, where if you plan for it, you can create this amazing content without them even realizing what you're doing necessarily, which
Go
is the best.
stealthy. Yeah, be stealthy about it. No, that's a really good point. And planning those things within an inch of their life is crucial because you will get so much more out of it. You're right. Yeah.
So, when you plan for doing branded content, what are some of the ways that you always make a plan to like reuse and recycle or upcycle that video content? Because of course, the one plan for piece might be where somebody starts, but there are a lot of opportunities, as you alluded to pull things out and reuse. So I'd love it, and the little bit of time we have left, to just maybe delve into that a tiny bit.
Definitely. I think, you do it in the writing and in the beginning. I would say from my like the past couple of years, the best example of that was what we did with Deal Tell, which was that the beginning of each video was an overview of what we were talking about. It was like a very specific animated, hybrid animated thing talking about exactly what it was. And it was for marketers. And it was about how marketers can use data. And it was different ways to easily teach marketers how to be data scientists,
Mhm.
which a lot of us aren't. Like, we're creative people. I mean, there are definitely marketers that are sciencey. They're wonderful. I am not one of those marketers. But it was kind of teaching these data science techniques. So I in the writing of it, me and this other wonderful writer, Laura Q, we figured out what we would actually be sharing on social well before it was even shot,
Yep.
because then that way those could become 30-second videos. These could be, a minute video. And then, if you want the full interview, then that looks like a whole other thing. So that people constantly think, oh my gosh, did they just sit around and film stuff all day? No, it's usually done on one day. Um, for example, all 4 of those episodes were shot on one day, because we had a crew with a crane and like,
Yep.
a dolly and everything like that. And so, like you're saying, we planned it within an inch of its life, where the different executives came in at different times of the day and what we could shoot in between those things. We just were sort of nimble about it. But we knocked those out, and we were able to do each one of them for like probably a tenth of the cost. We won an award alongside like Bloomberg, for this video. And a lot of people, I don't know what the budgets are on some of these other ones, but um, I've done budgets of $250,000 for video production for 5 minutes. This one was like 6,000 per episode, and so it makes financial sense as well to to plan them. But to bring it back to what you actually asked, do it in the writing before you even shoot it.
Well, I'll have to ask you when I'm to that part of the book I'm writing. I'm going to have to ask you for to talk to me about some examples of like how you put together your creative briefs or your scripts, because I do that too, and I always think it's fascinating to see other people's like frameworks or templates that they work from, because people sometimes get a little grouchy when they see what my template is, but it's like you got to start with your objectives, your audience, what you want people to do. And we always write out all the social content. Like for something like for like this conversation, we have a whole brief that has
Oh,
all of
I know.
the all of the
I
promotion.
was like, this is the first one. I've booked people in so many of these, and this is the first time I've seen one that's that detailed. And I was just like, damn, okay, this will be fun.
And you only got to see the outline of here's what we're going to talk about. Behind the scenes, we have all the promotional stuff, done well in advance. And that is just, that's how you make the most of it. Because people think about, oh, batching as far as like, oh, I should sit down one day and write a whole bunch of blog posts. It's like, you need to batch everything that you're doing as a marketer if you want to be effective. And for doing video content, if you just kind of lackadaisically do it whenever, it's going to be so much harder and cost so much more and take longer. And if you just get it done at one time, you get into the flow and you get everybody excited about it. And then you schedule it out. And then like magic, it just happens.
And then your anxiety goes down a lot, because it's done in advance. If there's any issues, you can fix them before it launches. So that's why I love working with you.
It's a mutual admiration society.
Yes.
We're both planners and creative people, which I know that doesn't always go together, but to me, it 100% makes it easier to be creative when
I
you
think,
have that framework in place. You know
yes,
where you're going.
100%. And also it just less crazy making. Yeah.
Yes. And then people trust you more too, because when they know what that journey is that you're promising them that you're going to go on, then they're like, okay, let's do it. Versus being like, well, we'll just see what happens. We'll see what the video is about. Yeah,
No,
no,
no, no, I don't like that.
definitely not. Well, Molly, thank you so much for spending your lunch hour with me, or my lunch hour. It might be your coffee time, I actually
Coffee
think.
break, yeah, but it was
Coffee break time. But if folks want to hear more from you and learn more about what you do, where should they go?
Oh, we have a brand new website, folks, mosaicgroupmedia.com. And you can contact us there. You won't see much on our LinkedIn because we only launched it like a week ago.
Congratulations.
We're busy marketing other people and we have to market it ourselves. So yeah, but thank you so much for watching. And Erika, thank you. This has been an awesome conversation.
It's been my pleasure. And everybody, we will see you again next week on Content Chat. Bye, guys.
Bye-bye.